Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM with Ryan, Matt, Aminder, Alicia, Matthew, and Emily. We are fourth-year BSN students at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo, British Columbia. We're working to demystify health issues affecting our community, bringing you evidence-based information about healthcare. This information is for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice of your primary healthcare provider. We would like to start our show by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw people, with a broadcasting range that overlaps the Kwotson and Tla'amin territories. This acknowledgement is done with gratitude to the Snuneymuxw people and with the intention to increase awareness about truth and reconciliation processes and efforts on Vancouver Island. Additional information and resources surrounding Snuneymuxw history, reconciliation, protocol, and land acknowledgement can be found on our Facebook and YouTube pages.
Hello everyone. As part of our season finale, we would all like to share the highlights of each of our episodes this past season. We hope you enjoyed these episodes and were able to take something away from them that helped you live stronger and more positively in your daily life. Thank you.
I would like to thank R.P. Frew, our CHLY Operations Manager, Andy Alexander, our instructor, and all the A Sound Constitution team members, Alicia, Ryan, Emily, Matthew, Aminder, and Matt for participating in providing intelligent, innovative, entertaining content that is informative and educational to all the listeners in our community. We really learned a lot in getting the opportunity of creating shows, and the process of creating our shows was researching from our credible sources, writing the scripts, recording and editing the show to communicate with the stakeholders for broadcasting.
Good afternoon, everybody. Emily here. At the beginning of the year, I hosted the episode on talking about the processes that go on behind the scenes of a pandemic, what some of the terms mean, and how they affect our lives. Things like contact tracing, who is responsible for what things in regards to like our provincial health services, our island health services, and then across Canada as well. During this episode, we met with Dr. Alana Devereaux, who is a professor of nursing at Vancouver Island University. She had done research on how mass vaccinations affected the nurses providing them during the H1N1 pandemic. And through this, she was able to provide a lot of really good insight into some of the challenges that she saw back then in public health managing a pandemic situation and how that applies to the current situation that we're in with COVID and future things, what we learned from that, and how we can kind of better prepare ourselves. Specifically, some of the really good things that came out of that conversation were looking at the fatigue in the population around social distancing or getting flu vaccinations or staying home if you're feeling unwell, things like that, things that we're trying to be aware of happening right now, because a lot of those recommendations that we were making then around social distancing, hand washing, and such are things that are also effective against most infectious diseases such as COVID, such as SARS, such as influenza. So, identifying that that's a difficult thing for people when we're living in those restrictions for so long, we kind of get fatigued. We get fatigued from hearing about it all the time on the news. We get fatigued from not being able to go see our friends and our families. And it starts to make it feel easier to take riskier choices because you're sort of in a situation that has become normalized. Now this has just become a part of your daily life, and it's just something you deal with. It's not noteworthy anymore, and that's one of the things that came up from that conversation. And another thing that I think we talked about that was really important then, and still definitely is now, especially going into the winter months when we're starting to see infection rates rise of COVID. And that was sort of the effects that are having on our healthcare workers. So specifically in this conversation, we're talking about like the amount of vaccinations that we're giving, managing the public around that, and everything that goes along with the logistics about when we're getting vaccines and how we're going to distribute them, which things are those are logistical concerns that we're kind of going to have to look at when the COVID vaccines start coming out. And hopefully some of what we've learned from H1N1 in 2009 we can kind of learn from now. Other things too is the effects on healthcare workers in acute care settings, right? Because we are there caring for patients that are with COVID or without COVID. People are possibly avoiding accessing services. So there's a lot of issues that I'm sure we're kind of hearing about a lot in the news and the media and such around access to care, right? So there's the COVID side of things where people are hospitalized, and that's very difficult on healthcare workers. They're concerned about their health, their family's health, and as cases rise, the more people that end up in the hospitals, and the more kind of pressure that ends up on those healthcare workers. But then there's also, those other pressures. So we get to a point where we need to start slowing down, doing surgeries that can be kind of put off for a little bit, or procedures and things. But all of that sort of starts to build up in the backlog, and it becomes very stressful and difficult to deal with. So that's one of the things we identified there. And outside of that wonderful conversation that we had with Dr. Alana Devereaux, there's also, contact tracing, still a really important step that our local public health agencies are still really having to work hard on, and even more so going in. And again, those case numbers rises, transmission between, there's more likelihood of transmission between people. And that relates to more work that those contact tracers have to do to investigate where those infections are happening, so we can inform people, but also so we can inform policy around what things are worth having open or unrestricted access to, and what things we need to kind of reevaluate, what restrictions we need to reevaluate and maybe change or reintroduce. And I mean, there really are a number of other things that I could identify too. I think that whole episode is still very relevant to where we are at today. So I'd highly recommend going and checking that out. It can be found on our YouTube page or our Facebook page, because I think it is still really important now. It's still really, all of it's still very relevant to the current situation we're all living in, and provides really valuable context that I think gets missed out sometimes when you talk about these things. So if you're curious or you want to learn more about these processes, I'd highly recommend going back and checking that out. Anyhow, thanks for listening.
My name's Alicia. I'm a fourth year nursing student. I've been a part of the Sound Constitution for both our spring semester where we talked about invisible illnesses, and then now our fall semester when we talked about coping with crisis, with kind of a specific eye towards COVID and how that's affected people throughout their lifespans and at every age group. We discussed our theme for this season as a group, and I feel like it was a very organic and collaborative decision to focus on coping with crisis, given that we are currently in the middle of a global pandemic. And at the time, back in September, there was still quite a bit of misinformation going around about what restrictions were. Everything was kind of starting to reopen, and people wanted to know what that meant for them. So the show that I was responsible for was Coping with Crisis for Children. So this is important to me personally because I myself am a parent and I have a young child, and there were a lot of questions surrounding things like schooling and things like long-term impacts on mental health, and what that was going to look like for our kids, not to mention the physical repercussions of having COVID and what that looks like after recovery. So myself, along with my co-host Matt, were lucky enough to have a discussion with 3 guests. Their names were Ashley, Ada, and Arlene, and they were all healthcare workers up and down the island for the First Nations Health Authority. So they brought a great wealth of information and wisdom with them regarding how kids were coping and how we could engage with our children to ensure that they have the most support systems possible. For me personally, during that interview was probably the highlight of my entire semester. I am First Nations myself, not from the island, from Vancouver Island, but actually from the Mi'kmaq Nation, which is primarily out in Nova Scotia. But I've been connected with First Nations, I've been connected with Indigenous people throughout my entire childhood, education, family, etc. So making sure that Indigenous people have a voice and are part of the conversation is also important to me, and it was kind of something that was a nice added benefit to this episode of our Sound Constitution shows. The perspectives from Ashley, Ada, and Arlene all focused on social behaviors and customs that are learned and that we truly really only learn when we are engaging with our peers, as well as the importance of connecting with nature and, finding a safe way to ensure that you are continuing to be able to connect with nature, and what that can look like for a child. Additionally, we spoke about what was normal healthy development. We brought up Erickson's stages of development, and we were also kind of able to relate potential risks or potential threats to that normal development because of the pandemic that we're facing right now. And we talked about what chronic stress can actually do to a body and things that can be seen as traumatic, and how those events can actually affect someone not only in childhood but kind of set them up for being affected throughout the rest of their lives. Some of the key points, other than the ones that I just mentioned, that came up as concerns for the children were, things like isolation, loss of routine, loss of stability in terms of food, in terms of shelter, in terms of social support networks, what those long-term outcomes might be, the chronic stress, connecting with family, whether or not you're able to do so, whether or not you're isolating for someone else's safety, and what that can look like in terms of a relationship for your child. Even still, I feel like this is really important and still very relevant to today's landscape or today's experiences. I mean, I myself ended up having to get a COVID test just because my son came home from school with a cold, and he ended up having to get one as well. But that was quite a traumatic experience for him, and it could very well have long-term effects on his life, in terms of, aversion to healthcare or aversion to things up his nose or things like that. And on top of that, I mean, the conversation surrounding our current situation is still happening, and there is still questions and there is still fears, and continuing the conversation about how this pandemic has affected children's lives and development is still very relevant and still very important to continue having. I strongly recommend, if you haven't given the episode a listen, to give it a listen. They are still available on our social media sites. It was a blast to make. It was probably one of my favorite episodes.
Hi everyone, my name is Aminder Kaur and I was the lead on the episode number 3, which was the impact of COVID-19 on youth. In this episode, my co-host Matt Potter and myself explored the impact that the coronavirus has had on youth in a wide variety of ways, not just their physical health, but mental health, work, education, and so on. Since youth are stuck at home during this time of pandemic, it was important to talk about the challenges that they are facing now and the strategies to overcome isolation and to help with social connection. Hence why I chose this topic. Our theme of the show is how youth can maintain social connection while being at home. And we created that theme into 3 phases. Phase 1 is youth who's already in a relationship. In this phase, we highlighted the key points of how to protect your bubble, in which we talked about the WHO and CDC recommendations, which are limiting your social bubble or social circle into 6 people. The second phase is youth in a relationship and wanting to start in-person socialization. The highlights of this phase were creating new bubble. And in that bubble, when you're meeting new people, you make sure what assessments they are taking, what is their risk of being exposed, how many people do they see, what precautions are they taking, how can that be done safely. In general, this phase was about taking your own precautions, considering who is in your bubble and how safe they are being. The third phase of the theme was youth creating online connections. In this section, we encouraged our listeners to keep their bubble small. And the key points of this discussion were like, for some people, the travel is not an option, and some relationships have had to shift to long distance relationship or online relations in order to survive. For this specific part, we talked about some ways to deal with forming new relationships as well as maintaining relationships in this challenging time of COVID-19. And for the interview part, we interviewed someone who has had personal experience both in maintaining a long-distance relationship as well as coping with many of the issues that the youth of today is facing or is dealing with in their relationships. And that person is none other than my own husband. The reason we chose him, or I decided to bring him to the interview or to this episode, is because he has relevant and personal experience in maintaining a long-distance relationship while balancing full-time work and full-time school. And this was one of the main issues we both had to deal with personally, as we were both in, of course, long-distance relationship for some time before the pandemic. So despite all those challenges we both faced, we not only started, built, and maintained our relationship as girlfriend and boyfriend, but continued to grow and thrive, and now we call each other husband and wife. So I feel like he was a great pick for me to bring him for the interview and share his experience for our audience and give some tips and strategies. He also, in the interview part, he shared great examples, experiencing not only for the people, not only for loved ones, it was also our relationships with our parents, with our friends, as well as our relatives. Beside this theme, we also included youth who may be struggling with issues surrounding their sexuality or gender identity, such as members of LGBTQ community who rely heavily on their friends and members of those communities for emotional and social support, which may have now been negatively impacted by COVID-19. Youth who are coming out as identifying within the LGBTQ/2Q community that affirm and validate their feelings and challenges. And we provided some resources, the credible resources, to help parents and guardians through this process alongside their youth. To summarize our episode, we explored the issues that the COVID-19 has had on youth, in particular, social isolation and how youth can maintain a social connection while at home, including navigating, forming, and maintaining long-distance relationships. We also discussed the importance of having a strong social support network for your mental health and well-being. Last but not the least part of my segment is my aha moment for this episode. Not for this just episode. Every time I recorded during this semester, I think I never thought that shows which gets aired on the radio, they could be recorded by sitting at home. For me, it's just a big thing. I never thought we'll be able to do that ever. That's all from my part. Thank you.
You're listening to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM. We are fourth year Bachelor of Science in Nursing students at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo, BC. We work within our community of Nanaimo and Vancouver Island to share credible, fact-based health information within our community. For those of you who are just joining us, we've been reviewing all of our previous episodes this season as part of our season finale episode. You just heard from Emily, Alicia, and Aminder talking about their seasons or episodes 1, 2, and 3. Next we have Ryan talking about his fourth episode, followed by myself and Matthew, and then Ryan again talking about palliative care.
Myself and Alicia co-hosted an episode on young adults and how they've been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. In that episode, we discussed why COVID-19 should be taken seriously by young adults and how their participation in reducing the spread positively affects everybody's lives. We discussed how young adults have been affected in emotional, psychosocial, and financial ways. I interviewed Mike and Victoria, their managers from the Vancouver Island University student residences, and they shared their perspectives on how young adults have been affected by COVID-19 and how they've overcome the challenges that they're faced with. And Alicia interviewed Leah from the Salvation Army shelter to discuss how COVID-19 has affected the homeless population here in Nanaimo and how we can help support the homeless population here.
Hi, this is Matt. I had the pleasure of presenting episode 5 this season with my co-host Emily, which was focused on our adult population and exploring some of the challenges facing adults with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the issues that we explored were social isolation, how people were able to cope with the lockdown in terms of lack of support. And then I had an interview with a friend, Justin, from Vancouver, in which we explored some other issues such as how small businesses and the economy were impacted, as well as the housing market. I think one of the highlights of my discussion with Emily was just exploring how much of an impact social interaction has on people's health and well-being, and how easy to take for granted that was before COVID-19 and before all of the social isolation restrictions came into place. We had a really good discussion around how important that is and how there are ways to still interact safely. And back then we were talking with regards specifically to Thanksgiving, and it was just before Halloween, but I think it's relevant again with Christmas on the horizon. Here's a little clip of our discussion from that episode.
I think the other thing that we can kind of touch on with that too is we are in the holiday season, right?
Yeah, which is a big thing. Like that's a very social time, even like Thanksgiving and then especially Christmas. Very social times, like lots of family get-togethers and that sort of thing. So it's going to be challenging for a lot of people to maybe not have that same level of social interaction that they're used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll also have a link to this. Throwing out all the resources now. There's the BC CDC has, again, really good rundown of how to set up these gatherings. So like sticking to your 6 people that are kind of in your bubble is one of them. Checking in with guests to see how they're feeling before they arrive.
Mm-hmm.
And either do things outside if possible, although things are getting colder now. So trying to be in larger rooms where you can kind of keep more space and spaces that are well ventilated and have fresh air coming in, serving food instead of having people go up to the food and serve it themselves.
I just think of like those long like banquet castle tables that are like super long, and you have like one person at each end and maybe a couple of people in the middle.
If you can fit one of those in my house, let's do that. We'll have Christmas together.
We need to bring those back, I think. One of the highlights of my interview with Justin, we were talking about the impact of COVID-19 on social interaction, but also how that in turn has impacted things like culture, because a lot of our culture revolves around social gatherings and food. And again, that's kind of relevant with Christmas coming up in the next little while. When I say culture, I don't necessarily mean like Western culture, but human culture in general. Here's a clip of our some of our discussion around that.
It's interesting. The things that make us human are the first things to be damaged, destroyed, or eliminated in an event like COVID, right? Arts, culture, music, food. These are things that sort of define our culture, that give perspective to who we are as humans, right? And they're the first to go. Like material things like shelter, getting help with your car payments. It's always there, but you know what? Coyotes have shelter, right? They dig holes in the ground, and that's where they live. It's not necessarily what makes us human. It sucks that, those are the first things to leave us, the things that we try to protect and cherish the most. I think from a business, but also a public health point of view, despite the rising case numbers, I do feel more comfortable and confident than I did in April. And that stems from a few things. I think the spiking numbers now, people are more aware.
Yeah.
Testing is readily available. People are getting tested, even if symptoms are super mild. And then on the health side of things, treatment is much better understood. Whether that's the cocktail of drugs that people are given or how they're treated in ICU, or when ventilators are applied, for example. Much better now than it was at the early part of the disease. Yeah, so I feel comfortable from the public health perspective, and that public health perspective gives me confidence in the business side.
I like that last segment of our interview because it really captures, I think, an important point, which is that it's very important to stay positive and optimistic and focus on as many of the positives as we can right now. There's a lot of bad news out there, but I think there's also good news out there, and bad times can also bring out a lot of the good within people. I think this episode's really relevant, and it really applies to our practice community. There's a lot of small businesses within the NIMO, and there's a lot of people who have younger families or aging family members that they're all trying to take care of, who are impacted heavily by COVID-19. I think despite all of the problems that we talked about within this episode, there's also a lot of room for creative solutions and creative problem solving. And there's a lot of optimism out there. There's a lot of good news as well, despite all the bad news. And I think generally this was a very positive, optimistic episode, and I really hope our listeners were able to take something positive away from it.
Hello, I'm Matthew, and I would want to do an overview of a Sound Constitution's Older Adults Coping with Global Health Crisis episode. We want to record this episode to connect with older adults and their families in the community. This is very important to us due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic affecting every aspect of daily life. Older adults have been particularly affected by this pandemic, as they are most vulnerable to this crisis. With this reality, it can be very difficult for older adults to meet their daily activities and live a fulfilling life. With this reality, we wanted to describe to listeners the struggles and vulnerabilities of older adults in this pandemic. We also wanted to help older adults find new resources to connect with family and function in the community. In the discussion section of this episode, Aminder starts by sharing a very relevant narrative of loneliness in long-term care and the experience of residents in a pandemic world of isolation. I'll talk about older adults' physical vulnerabilities to COVID-19 and their higher susceptibility to infection is related to older adults' less effective immune systems and more common health complications like diabetes and heart disease. With this in mind, I will highlight safety measures older adults and families can use to protect their health and others. Furthermore, Alicia will provide community resources that will help older adults meet their activities of daily living, from grocery shopping, exercise, and attending appointments. In this episode, we had the delight to interview Kim Love. She is a registered nurse and clinical nurse lead at West Haven Long-Term Care in Port Alberni. She has great experience in both acute and chronic care settings. We had an expansive, wide-ranging conversation with her, from discussing how the lives of residents has changed to the experience of families to the new safety guidelines. We talked about the new communication resources that are available for families and the new ways older adults can have entertainment and engage in community activities, from online shopping to exercise. We also talked about what the future of long-term care will look like during the pandemic. I hope you enjoy the interview. Overall, this episode was to bring focus about the challenges older adults are facing in the COVID-19 pandemic, to provide resources, relatable health information, safety tips, and an interview with a health professional on the front lines of long-term care and COVID-19. The greatest thing I learned in this episode was the importance for communication and community support to help vulnerable individuals cope with crisis. I hope you enjoyed the episode and found it a great learning experience. Thank you.
Emily and I co-hosted an episode discussing palliative and end-of-life care in the Central Island and how they've been affected by COVID-19. We discussed just what end-of-life care and what palliative care are and how they differ from one another. We discussed the ways in which COVID-19 has affected inpatient palliative care and at-home palliative care. We discussed some resources made available by Island Health for inpatient and at-home palliative care during this time. We interviewed Marianne Maloney from the Bachelor of Science in Nursing faculty here at VIU, and our colleague Carly, who worked in palliative care during the first wave of the pandemic, to discuss what palliative care is, what palliative care isn't, and how COVID-19 restrictions have changed palliative care in the Central Island region.
Are you concerned about how COVID-19 has affected people throughout their lifespan? Come listen to us every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m., only on A Sound Constitution.
You've been listening to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM with Matt, Alicia, Emily, Aminder, Matthew, and Ryan. We're fourth-year Bachelor of Science in Nursing students at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo, BC, and we work with A Sound Constitution to share credible, fact-based health information within our community. This season's theme has been exploring how COVID-19 has impacted our community throughout the lifespan. This is a very special episode, as it is our final episode of this season and our final episode as your hosts of A Sound Constitution. To celebrate, we've been reviewing all of the highlights and key points from our episodes throughout this season. Next up, we're going to each discuss what some of our highlights and key takeaways from our time with the Sound Constitution has been.
To be completely honest, at the beginning of the Sound Constitution, or at least at the beginning of our involvement with the Sound Constitution, I personally really struggled with relating what was expected to us to nursing practice in itself. However, through the process of, finding out what our mission is, how to produce a show, how to communicate with the community, and all of those things, I found that it was very relevant to nursing, and that it helped us to display leadership, professional responsibility, relational practice, needs assessments again, and preserving personhood within our community, which is a strong tenet of our discipline.
Can you explain a little bit more about what relational practice is?
Relational practice, in general, is the act of talking to people in a respectful nature and understanding and recognizing power dynamics that may exist in your relationship. This meant that we needed to utilize relational practice with each other, with our community, and with our interested stakeholders.
Ryan, what are your thoughts?
We were able to actually practice our critical thinking skills, our ability to conceptualize relevant and informative media, our relational practice, all through our production of these radio shows, be it our interpersonal communication between ourselves in producing the shows, reaching out to our members of the community, working with our instructor and our field guide.
We engaged with healthcare professionals and our community members to strengthen these skills throughout the semester through the production of our episodes, interviewing various stakeholders in our community, university students, and people affected by the topics we chose around mental health and global health crises. We also used social media to communicate with our community members and understand what they needed from us and to build our trustworthiness and credibility with our listening base through being active in our community, especially through times of COVID where we weren't necessarily able to get out there in person.
In terms of understanding the community, it really helps to appreciate just how different our community is in terms of its demographics and like different types of people that are a part of the community, but then also finding ways that connect everybody together within that community and realizing that despite people being from vastly different walks of life or backgrounds, being part of a community, you are all still sharing certain commonalities, and that can be a way to bring people together.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway for the program, and I think it will definitely affect our future practice, and it will affect how we view the people that we come into connection with. Depending on where we end up. I know where I'm ending up is, I'm going to the operating room, and that means I'm going to have a limited exposure to clients. But I'm pretty sure you're trying to go to public health, right? So how do you think that this course is going to affect, your practice at public health?
So going off of sound constitution, I feel like all these nursing skills which we develop and use, that's going to help us improve working in our practicums. For me, it's going to be public health. It's not only going to help me make better nurse, but also going to deliver quality health for our clients and in the community and make a positive difference in their lives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, positive difference is I know it's kind of the focus of our entire program, but I think it's been a major focus within a sound constitution as well. I mean, Ryan and Emily, how do you feel that this course has impacted you, and how do you feel it will reflect your future practice?
Yeah, I think that it's helped understand the community that we work with on Vancouver Island a lot more intimately, and I think that that's going to help us connect with our community regardless of what area we're in, of public health or acute care in a hospital or emergency or anything like that. I think that just having kind of the tools to understand and connect with our community is really going to help us be able to provide relational care. And then on top of that, we've learned some really great skills onto how to find good, relevant, quality, and evidence-based information to give our patients.
Absolutely, and I personally find that I better understand, because I'm not originally from the island, so having done this radio program, I find I do better understand the kind of demographics and the populations of the Central Island, which is going to be really helpful for me because I'm aiming to do my career in this area in emergency care. So I'll be seeing the gambit of people that live out here.
Yeah, for sure. And what about you, Matt B?
I think I agree with everything that has been said. This course has provided so much insight into all the aspects of what has been going on in the community in regards to health and what people are dealing with in these difficult times. And I think what we have learned so far from the community, and the community is basically like the precursor to everything that shows up in the hospital. So understanding what things are going on in the community will help us be more effective nurses in terms of our practice in the clinical setting as well. And I think that is one of the big things that we can take forward from this experience with the Sound Constitution.
All right, team. So does anyone have or anyone want to share their favorite memory from our time working with the Sound Constitution?
I forget when exactly it was last semester, but we were outside the library and we were trying to film a video. I think it was right sort of in the early days of COVID-19. But we were trying to film this video outside the library, and we were walking up and down in front of it trying to film this segment as we were walking. And people kept walking in the back behind us, and our shadows were getting in the way. And I don't remember if we actually ever ended up using that clip. And I remember we then went and sat down on the bench there, and we're trying to make it work just sitting instead of walking because the walking was getting to be a bit too difficult to manage.
Yeah.
But
And I remember I was the keeper. I was keeping the bags safe, and at the same time blocking people so they don't come in the video. So we were taking care of the confidentiality of the client at the same time. I know, that was such a great memory.
I think my favorite was sitting when we first started the season last semester, and we were all in my basement. And we were trying to do all of our intros and outros and, our little advertisements that we do. Ryan had set up all of his equipment, and he was putting reverbs on things and making everything sound as funny as possible.
We'd all keep bursting out laughing in the middle of a segment, and then we'd have to stop and re-record it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I could not even record anything at all. I literally had to go off of one line from a paper, and I had to redo it 5-6 times because in the beginning I was that nervous, but at the same time I would laugh. But whereas where I am now, we can literally go off of okay, that segment is done, that's done. We have learned so much.
My favorite memory is, of course, it was the time that we went out for a drive to Ladysmith to try to record the first aid video, and then when we recorded the video, some of the stuff wasn't in frame, so then we couldn't use the video afterwards and stuff like that. So I think we had to re-record. Mm-hmm. Or that time we went downtown to go visit CHLY, and we went out for a working lunch, and we were brainstorming all kinds of ideas on what we want to do with the show at the cafe there.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was going to be my thing that I talked about.
Well, then Emily, jump right in.
Yeah, no, I think that was one of my favorite times. I remember we were down there at the vault after meeting with RB down at the station, and for the first time going to Chile, and it's this old little hole in the wall, but it was lovely, a little warm, cozy studio, and the first time we're seeing that and talking to all the people there. And it was a cool experience to kind of get to do that and then sit down as a group and have a lovely lunch, and everybody's so excited about the different things we can talk about and how we're going to approach things, how we're going to approach our semester, our season, who's going to talk about what, and yeah, it was just everyone was so excited and having the ability pre-COVID to meet for a lunch like that really helped, I think, bring us together as a team for sure, and that's something that I think now we miss out with, but looking back on it was really a good experience, I feel like.
And I can't believe we were first meeting up for lunch and everything, and feel like that was just a month ago, and now we are actually ending it all.
Some of my fondest memories were we would usually do group work afterwards. So between our meeting with our instructor and then our independent group work sessions, we'd often go to the cafeteria and we'd go and get coffee and just those moments of having existential crises while you're walking up to the cafeteria because you're so overwhelmed with school, while kind of tough at the time, I kind of love it in hindsight. I think I took it for granted. I never thought I would miss school. But I really, really miss school now. I think a good lesson to take away from all of this is, and it's a simple one, and we should have known it before, but I don't think you really realize it until you're in it. It's easy to take stuff for granted. Like, when extraordinary circumstances like this happen and you're not able to even experience the mundane day-to-day that you were used to, you definitely give thanks for what you had, even when you may not have at the time. So don't take anything for granted and give thanks for what you have when you have it, I guess.
Well said.
So I suppose that's a good transition into another thing I think we should talk about. So team, what is, for each of you, something that you've learned or something new that you've taken away from this experience?
I think the most interesting thing or most surprising thing that I learned this semester, doing a sound constitution and talking about a sound constitution in our community, was that university students are the highest demographic of people who access food banks and experience food insecurity, at least in this specific community setting. And I think that, that was relevant pre-pandemic, and I wonder if it's even more relevant, given our current stresses and given our current new normal, as we've been saying, because I wonder what that's going to look like 3 years from now or 5 years from now in terms of community and access to service.
Yeah, and especially during a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, everyone is struggling in their own way right now, and everyone's challenges are unique, and it's definitely important to be empathic and understanding of the fact that different people are struggling with different things right now. So I suppose I can speak to something I took away. I was, I think, kind of amazed going through this process of working on a sound constitution of just wealth of knowledge that is available in the Central Island and the amount of legitimate experts in different fields that choose to live here. It's incredible. I don't think we've ever really struggled to find people to speak to who are experts in different areas of healthcare. It's incredible, and we're very, very fortunate to have those resources.
Yeah, I think, like everyone has mentioned, that just the number of resources, but as well how to access those resources, because sometimes it's not very apparent how to get access to them, and for people that are in the community and needing to reach out to these wonderful resources we have, it can be quite confusing. So as nurses, it's, I think, really good to know about those resources, having connections with the people who work within them, and knowing how to navigate the systems that we work within for the patients the patients and clients that we work with.
Since the beginning of this semester, a lot has changed with regards to the pandemic, COVID-19. We're now in the middle of the second wave of the pandemic, but there's some exciting new developments regarding some vaccinations that are on the horizon, and Almond did some research and has some good information regarding that. Almond, do you want to elaborate?
Since the start of pandemic, all the major pharmaceutical companies have been in pursuit to develop a vaccine to curb the COVID-19. One of the companies to release the data about their trials are Pfizer BioNTech and Moderna. Let's talk about the main features of the vaccine by Pfizer BioNTech first. According to the article, and the article name is COVID Vaccine, First Milestone Vaccine Offers 90% Protection, and this is by the author James Gallagher, and I found this article on BBC website. The author states that Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was one of the first vaccines to be proven effective during the safety trials. The vaccine was tested on 43,500 people in 6 countries, and those countries are US, Germany, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, and Turkey. According to this article, 2 doses are required 3 weeks apart, and the findings show that 90% protection is achieved 7 days after the second dose. Some of the challenges regarding this brand new vaccine are the data provided is only interim data. It is not known if the vaccine will stop the spread of the virus or just stop the development of symptoms. The question of how long the immunity will last may take months and even years to answer. All right, let's discuss how this vaccine functions in our immune system. So the new Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine employs a complete experimental approach in developing this RNA vaccine, which involves injecting part of the virus's genetic code in order to train the immune system. And let's see what this immune system further does. The vaccine enters the cell and tells the cell to produce a coronavirus spike protein. This in turn prompts the immune system to produce antibodies and activate the T cells to destroy the infected cells. And then, after getting the vaccine, if the patient encounters a coronavirus, the antibodies and T cells are triggered to fight the virus. No significant safety concerns were reported during the trial phase of this vaccine. Okay, and now let's move on to the second vaccine by Moderna. According to the article, and the article name is Moderna COVID vaccine shows nearly 95% protection, by the same author James Gallagher, and on the same website PBC. Moderna vaccine also uses the same innovative and experimental RNA technique to design the vaccine. The trial for Moderna vaccine included 30,000 people in the US, where half of the candidates were given placebo/dummy injections and half were given 2 doses of the vaccine 4 weeks apart. According to the company, the vaccine is reported to be 95% effective, as per the article name suggests itself. The data also showed that there were 11 cases of severe COVID in the trial, but none of them happened in the people who were immunized. No serious side effects other than short-lived fatigue, headache, and pain were reported after the injection in some patients. Now, let's move on to the differences between both the vaccines. The main difference between the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is the Moderna vaccine appears to be easier to store. It can be stored at -20 degrees Celsius to up to 6 months and can be kept in a standard fridge for up to a month, whereas the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine needs ultra-cold storage below -80 degrees Celsius, but it can be kept in the fridge for 5 days. Okay, so now you must be thinking as to why these vaccines need to be stored at such low temperature. Well, I found the article, and the article name is Why the Most Promising COVID-19 Vaccines Require Super Cold Storage. And this article is on Smithsonian Mag website. The author Teresa McMeer explains that in order to prevent any damage, vaccine producers not only make chemical changes to the synthetic messenger RNA, and wrap it in a protective layer, but also store it at a low temperature to trap chemical reactions in slow motion. Therefore, the vaccine needs to be stored at such a cold temperature.
You've been listening to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM with Emily, Aminder, Ryan, Alicia, Matthew, and Matt. We're 4th year Bachelor of Science in Nursing students at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo, BC. We work with A Sound Constitution to share credible, fact-based health information within our community. We were just listening to Aminder explain some of the information regarding the new vaccines that are in development. We would like to thank all of our listeners for tuning into our show. This is our final episode as your hosts with a Sound Constitution. Next semester, we welcome Carla, Max, Harris, Kelly, and Sam to be your new hosts for a Sound Constitution. We reached out to them and we have some introductions from Harris, Carla, and Max. We'll have a listen to those now.
Hi, my name's Harris. I'm a third-year nursing student at VIU. I'm looking forward to joining you this fall at a Sound Constitution and getting to know the community in the process.
Hello to the hosts and listeners of A Sound Constitution on CHLY. My name is Max, third-year nursing student and one of your incoming hosts in 2021. Talk to you soon.
Hello, my name is Carla Care2. I'm a third-year nursing student at VIU, and I'm excited to be part of the upcoming season for A Sound Constitution. I look forward to hearing about everyone's stories and joining in the conversation about health in our community.
We're excited to have them take over as hosts for A Sound Constitution and pass the torch on to them. And once again, we'd like to thank our listeners and our instructor Sandy and Arby from CHLY for all of your support during our time here with A Sound Constitution. It's been a real pleasure presenting A Sound Constitution for all of you, and we really appreciate you tuning into our show. We hope you've enjoyed our last 2 seasons and have found the information helpful, useful, and educational. From myself and on behalf of all of my co-hosts at A Sound Constitution, thank you again, and we wish you all the best. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. We encourage you to reach out to your healthcare provider for more information. As always, check out our Facebook page for additional resources related to today's show. Every episode is uploaded to our YouTube channel if you'd like to hear it again. If there are any topics you'd like us to explore, please contact us at asoundconstitution@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM.